Today is a video like no other. We have a crazy crafting journey ahead of us, and I'm finally delivering what you've all been asking for, a battle report on Warhammer's greatest location ever, the Imperial Palace on Terra, but it might not be quite what you expect. Over the past 6 months, we have been working on this Imperial Palace megaboard, and it is finally so ready for some gameplay. Almost. It just needs a few special things.
My music is a pillar upon which whole worlds have been built.
Today, folks, it is finally time to reveal the greatest secret of the Imperial Palace megaboard. When I'm building massive layouts, no matter the setting, from my massive Middle-earth megaboards right across to the Warhammer universe, I end up spending so much time on each project that it's incredibly important that the layout has multiple uses, whether this is through modular layout options or different parts that can be reconfigured for a variety of gameplay. I use a lot of design tricks to try and get the most bang for my buck out of my mega builds. Some of you might remember the most crazy example of this, a bunch of my Lord of the Rings, Minas Tirith and Gondor scenery being adapted to form large chunks of my Leptius Numinous and Numinous City Ultramar boards for the Mark of Kelth campaign. But today, with the Imperial Palace, I'm doing something even more extreme. Everything we've built so far for the Imperial Palace megaboard is designed to be super modular. We've already had a look at some of the different layouts that this board can make in previous videos, but today we are reconfiguring a whole new aspect of the build. The scale. In the journey so far, we've approached the board from an epic scale. For those of you unfamiliar, that means a Space Marine is somewhere around 6 to 8 millimeters tall. This is a really handy scale for something like the Imperial Palace, because technically, by the law, even at 6 millimeter scale, the outer wall of the palace rampart would be 6 meters high. And once I drop in the next section of wall, which is going in behind this tower, the build will be over 3 meters tall, and that's big enough for me. But all of the elements that really obviously tie this board to that scale, the epic scale scenery, are fully removable, because this board is actually a dual scale build. The 28mm scale systems for the Horus Heresy and Warhammer 40k are both gaming systems that I really enjoy, so I wanted this board to be able to be used for both 30k and epic scale Siege of Terra games, potentially even both at the same time, and also be a great landscape for playing my custom Warhammer 40k Dawn of War Warhammer rule set. So today we're finally going to get this beast of a megaboard ready for the first battle report over on Zorphammer. Now, in the last video, I conducted a bunch of polls in the comments on my Patreon and on my Facebook group about which battle reports I should film first. And basically, you lot want to kind of just see everything, and you know what? I agree. So I've decided we're just going to slam out all of those options, and as I think the Siege of Terra deserves something a little extra special, we're actually going to start with a monster game of Dawn of War Warhammer, with the crazy Xeno scum of the Eldar battling it out against the mighty forces of the Imperial Guard. This battle report is live right now over on Zorphammer, link down below in the description and the pinned comment, but before you jump over there and watch some amazing gameplay on this Imperial Palace megaboard, we need to get the board ready for filming. In Dawn of War Warhammer, each faction needs a set of buildings that they build as their base expands across the map. Now luckily, I've got this gorgeous set of Imperial Guard themed buildings that I printed using the STLs from War Scenery, which are just so much fun to deploy on the table, and all available from my link down in the description. So that's our Imperial Guard sorted, but today's crafting challenge is all about bringing our ELDAR CRAFTWORLD to the Imperial Palace on Terra. What are the ELDAR doing here on the Imperial Palace? Well, I'm thinking that they're just cruising through the webway, having a good time, and then some poor Farseer's attendant, little low-ranking warlock, accidentally leans on a button and accidentally phases a whole part of their craft world through the webway gate under the Imperial Palace, and boop! Suddenly, they're in the middle of Terra, and I want part of a craft world half phased into this board. It's time to start making an ELDAR craft world on the Imperial Palace on Terra. So our craft world is going to have a bunch of key features. We need a permanent wraithbone structure that is merged with the walls like it's phasing out of the webway, but we also need a bunch of loose Eldar buildings to be the buildable structures during Dawn of War Warhammer gameplay. And to start both, I slapped a bunch of the Elven Refugium STLs from War Scenery on the printers and knocked out a bunch of buildings. Now Louis and the team over at War Scenery have put together this range of STLs with Dawn of War Warhammer in mind, which is just amazing. We've got structures perfect for all the buildings we need and heaps of useful scatter terrain that I can kit bash and craft into our craft world landscape. The lead sculptor on the project is actually one of my long-term Patreons, and it's been awesome getting little sneak peeks over the last few months as the guys were working on this. Big shout out to Phoenix Forge AU, who added a bunch of custom features to the buildings just for us Dawn of War players. With assembly complete, it is painting time, and I decided to try and get really clever during this process. I want these pieces looking as good as possible, but at this point it's about a week until my mate Jason and I need to start filming the battle report, so we need to do some serious speed painting. The key texture is of course our wraithbone, so to build up the beginnings of that bone-like material, I slapped down a prime in bright white, and then applied a series of layers of cream and light grey in splotchy, patchy applications, blending them all together to try and create a bit of a mottled hue to represent the more natural grown quality of the wraithbone. Then a final top-down white highlight to give a sense of lighting. This all took very little effort, and already the pieces look much better than just plain white, a nice easy win. Now of course the wraithbone isn't healthy. I want it to look like it's sort of sick and damaged. I love the idea that this fragment of the craft world that has popped into existence in the Imperial Palace would be damaged from its transition to real space. Maybe the wraithbone is even beginning to sort of sicken and die because it's separated from the craft world mothership, and I can imagine my Farseer standing atop of the command building, rapidly trying to heal the wraithbone and phase the craft world back into the webway, while the aspect warriors are holding the hordes of the Imperial forces at bay. So to create this sickened look, I used a technique usually used for marbling, drying out and cutting and stretching apart a baby wipe and then airbrushing through the wipe like a stencil. For marbling, you start with a dark prime and spray greys and whites, but for our sickened wraithbone, I'm doing the opposite, spraying black over our white wraithbone to create black blemishes and stains. As the wipe got saturated with black paint, it also started to kind of splodge on little flecks of solid black, which were totally accidental, but looked amazing.
Just a quick shout out to my mate Con's new sort of like social networking app for finding other wargamers. It's called VoxLink. All the links are down in the description. You guys have probably heard me talk about it before. It's awesome. So you want to find games, get on VoxLink. Go check it out.
Then I swapped to a more concentrated black and went in and added all of our important black details. Vents, grills, Eldar buildings are nature and culture, wildness and artifice, all in harmony and all in the one perfect county. Up next, we need to have a two-tone vibe with a splash of color to match our Eldar army. Now, as we'll find out a bit later, my craft world is Ibrasil, a lesser known craft world who tie into my theme quite nicely as they operate really close to the Eye of Terror, and they're constantly waging war against the forces of chaos in their quest to secure spirit stones and any lost technology of the ancient Eldari Empire on the long-lost Crone worlds deep within the Eye of Terror. Their main color is a nice greeny kind of blue-gray, so I slapped that down through the airbrush all over the key panels. Using contrast allows the kind of damaged wraithbone effects to still show through that colored layer, and the reason I've done that in this order instead of adding the weathering on top is that the damage is intrinsic to the core wraithbone, so that should be underneath the painted layer, and I think that reads really nicely. Then it's gemstone time, and far out this layer took such a long time, just a heap of red all over every little single gem on every structure, but I do love how much the third accent color really makes the pieces pop. Then I grabbed some blue and purple contrasts and added some nice energy effects to the power generators, and then gave all of the black details a little dry brush with silver to pop those details, and then gave everything a nice big varnish with Rust-Oleum matte varnish. This helps protect the paint layers, as often paint can kind of rub off FDM prints quite easily when you're applying washes and kind of heavily brushing against them. And that's because our final stage is a big black wash with some Liquitex ink diluted in water. To get the wash wash to flow nicely, I mixed in a little rinse aid which breaks the surface tension and helps the wash sink into all of the recessed details. The wash ties everything together by essentially blacklining a lot of the panel details, but it also adds some grime from the war-torn palace. Now, when making such massive scenery projects like the Imperial Palace, magnetizing certain components can be an absolute lifesaver. All the various walls and towers on the palace gatehouse and ramparts are prime candidates for magnetizing. I've been magnetizing different parts of a whole range of projects for years, from all the various weapon and equipment loadouts in our Dawn of War Warhammer series, all my Horus Heresy vehicles from tanks to titans, even destructible ruins on my Osgiliath megaboard. But for such a massive project as the Imperial Palace, we will need a lot of magnets.
So we got some help from today's sponsor, the almighty Magnet Baron, because magnets, they just solve everything.
If you need magnets for your wargaming, then look no further than the magnetbaron.com, your DIY super magnet home. Magnetbaron.com have a huge range of wargaming magnets which are super powerful and even have specific kits for notoriously difficult to magnetize models, magnetized movement trays, and magnetized collapsible flight stands for the epic travel wargaming experience.
I challenge you to find a better feeling in all of wargaming than the pure bliss of this moment. Magnetic perfection.
So to score some boss wargaming magnets for all your army needs, hit up the magnetbaron.com, link down in the description, so go and show him some love. The final piece of our ELDAR Craftworld is the chunk of fused wraithbone that has actually phased into the palace itself, and to make that, we need a few brand new sections of palace wall. To keep the Dawn of War Warhammer game symmetrical, I actually started by expanding the Imperial Palace battlements on the Imperial side of the board, bulking out the back of the main battlement, as well as a brand new undamaged wall to create space for our Imperial Guard forces and their build zone. Then it was time to make a mirror on the Eldar side, but with a very big twist. The core structure is the same as our normal wall that we just saw, a big old box of foam secured together with liquid nails and skewers, but from here, things are going to get very spicy with our foam cladding. I want part of the board to be the Imperial stonework, and then have this boundary of shattered stone and misaligned blocks where a wraithbone structure has phased into existence within the walls itself. I started on the front wall, cutting a whole heap of foam panels to represent the front of the stone blocks and gluing them down, but weathering the edges where they overlapped the wraithbone section. To give real kind of dynamism to the damage, I chamfered the backs of these blocks at various angles to make it seem like the displaced stonework was blown out from the inside by the force of the teleportation. Then on top of the wall, I created the same effect but with the broad flat flagstone style of the palace foundation. With this kind of flatter profile stonework, it was a little tricky to get the tilting tiles to read nicely, but after a few attempts, I was pretty thrilled with the overall effect. Some extra foam details to bulk out the battlement, as well as carving in some extra cracking and damage details with a pencil, scalpel, foily, and bricky, and we have got a really promising start, but of course, now we need our wraithbone. Now I had planned on something pretty insanely ambitious here with a heap more 3D prints, but I ran out of filament and forgot to order some, and I basically have about 4 hours to spend on this piece, so I started by cutting some foam paneling to build a platform that juts out from the blown out wall. I experimented with cutting down a yogurt tub to be the lower support whilst decorating the top with 3D prints, but after gluing that kind of core structure down, I just got some massive creative block, so I decided to jump up to the top of my wraithbone escarpment. Here I had a simple plan, to just lay a bunch of cardboard in a pattern that mimicked the designs that we see in the glorious war scenery prints. And you know, it's totally working. I was super pessimistic at the beginning and panic was really setting in, but as I layered more and more cardboard details with the right kind of separation and the pattern of the grooves, it really started to come together. Back on the front wall, I scrapped the yogurt container completely and just jumped to the hot wire cutter and sliced up some supports in foam using a knife, and then my thumbs and some light sanding to try and create organic, uniform shapes from the foam. Then a few paint tins to make some more pretty half-circle plinths and rounding off and beveling those edges to get uniform, organic plinths with a bunch of decorative cardboard just like the top, and we've built up a pretty interesting structure which I think totally works. Right, let's bring it to life with paint. First, we've got our all-over grey primer with the spray gun, then our light accent pass with grey to bring up all of the Imperial stonework, and then some pure white on all of the Wraithbone.
Whoa, that's not the right wash. Ugh, that's why we label washes.
Right, after that near disaster, I mixed up some fresh black wash and slapped it down all over the Imperial stonework, and then it is time to work on our Wraithbone. And I built up our damaged Wraithbone texture just as before with the 3D prints, and then added a splash of our greeny blue in some key regions to tie this piece of Wraithbone to the color palette of our scatter terrain. Then it was just a matter of popping down our glorious Eldar buildings from war scenery, and just wow. Look, this isn't my best work, but I basically built both of those wall extensions in a single day, and I've got it done with just enough time to make the final preparations for the battle report.
Some of you might have noticed that this video is a week late. There's been some kind of mental stuff happening behind the scenes, and so I'm just extra happy to not only bring you this video, but also the battle report over on Zorphammer, my second channel. We've got a double upload this week. It's been chaos. An extra special thank you to all of my Patreons. I've been spamming them with photos and videos of kind of everything that's been going on. There's a couple of big update vlogs on Patreon itself, and they've been amazing at keeping up my spirits. It's been absolutely essential. So just a monster thank you to all of my Patreons and YouTube channel members. If you want to support the channel, the best way to do that is Patreon, or becoming a channel member, or throwing a super chat down in the comments. It is like life-changingly helpful. A massive thank you to each and every single one of you.
But with the board coming along nicely, we are of course going to need some Eldar to invade the Imperial Palace. And I do not have the time to smash out entire armies from scratch, but I managed to pick up an awesome deal from an absolute lad named Raymond, who was selling a massive Eldar force in pieces, and I picked a bunch of all of the classic Eldar units we see in Dawn of War, a great mix of troops and vehicles and heroes. We've got Guardians,
All Eldar must answer the call.
Howling Banshees,
We are the harbingers of death.
Fire Dragons,
Kill them swiftly.
some awesome Eldar vehicles, and of course the almighty Avatar.
I am Kayla Mencha Kale.
But the army does need a bit of work to get it ready for the table. First, there's some travel damage, a few heads have popped off, arms have dislodged, and of course, the ever-breakable Finecast. We've got Ranger rifle barrels, but it's all nothing that a bit of glue can't fix. Even our almighty Avatar needed a little help with his floppy Forge World sword. Then I decided I wanted to add another classic unit to the army, some Striking Scorpions, a favorite Eldar unit of mine when I was a teenager, so I ripped out the new plastic sprues from their Kill Team box set and set to work assembling them. Like all modern Games Workshop troop kits, this was a mild assembly nightmare, but they do look amazing. Up first, I actually made 2 Exarchs so that I can run this as 2 smaller squads in Dawn of War Warhammer, or 1 big squad of 9. Then, with the Scorps ready for paint, I slapped them down outside and slapped down some primer. First a dark grey, and then a zenithal with light grey and then white. While I'm out priming, I also grabbed a set of 10 Finecast Fire Dragons that Ray had already primed in a dark red, which will be nice for the base tone, but then I hit them with a grey-white zenithal as well, so that I can build up some nice bright orange and yellow later on. In case you don't know the Eldar army, it is a mix of craft world units which have a unified scheme that varies depending on the craft world, just like the different colours of different Space Marine chapters, but there are also aspect warrior units which are usually the same scheme no matter the craft world, like the Striking Scorpions and the Fire Dragons. These next half-painted units, a War Walker and some Storm Guardians, will need to be matched to Ray's original scheme. Now, he kindly gave me the recipe, but I don't quite have the right paints, and it is not my usual army style anymore, so it's going to be a bit of a fun painting challenge. I'll need to iron out the contrast paint base coat, and I managed to nail the colour by mixing 2 random blue-green contrasts together. That is unbelievably close. and then just touched up all the models where primer was showing through. Next I grabbed some Temple Guard blue and did a huge blue mid-tone pass, applying a thin layer over that contrast to kind of bulk out the panel color and get rid of that patchy contrast finish, but leave the darker blue in the recesses. I was really surprised by how much fun this was. I actually haven't painted any Warhammer since my Blood Ravens nearly 15 months ago, and also this classic style of painting was a bit of a blast from the past. It's not at all how I paint these days. There was a heap of black that needed base coating while the blue midtone was drying, and then I mixed up a little blue highlight just by adding in some white and set about the monstrous task of edge highlighting all of the blue armor, and suddenly the fun evaporated and I remembered why I stopped painting like this. The blue armor is now looking solid, but the edge highlighting train hasn't left the station yet, with some dark grey accents needed all over the black components. And then stuff all this brushwork, it's time for cheat mode with some metallic Sharpies. If you are trying to speed paint metallics with a brush, you are a chump. Get about that Sharpie life, Zorptrons. Little gold and silver details went down all over these little space elves, which really helped to make the models pop against the blue and the black. Then there was a few red-orange gemstones on the vehicles and the defense platform, and then a big old wash of Nuln oil all over the models, and these guys are looking awesome. A perfect replica of Ray's original scheme. They're going to fit in really nicely with the rest of the army.
So I feel terrible. I'm on like day 7 of this raging fever. I've got ear infections and my painting output is so bad. But I finally finished the Storm Guardians and the War Walker. That took me 2 days somehow. But at least that's all of the models that have to match the original scheme and those techniques now finished. And now we can paint some Warhammer the way that I normally paint. Airbrushes, washes, it's all coming out.
Okay, so I already hit a slight snag. I never actually cleaned my airbrush after I did all those black layers on the 30,000 little windows on the Imperial Palace that we saw a few videos ago. So it's, look, it'll be salvageable, but this bad boy is gonna need a deep clean and a soaking in some ISO overnight, but I ain't got that kind of time. And then at the bottom of a box of random painting supplies, I found this absolute gem that my mate Emil from Squidmar sent me like 4 years ago. At the time, it was such a beautiful airbrush. I was so intimidated and just too scared to use it, but I am a noob no longer, and hopefully I won't desecrate this gorgeous, gorgeous airbrush. I'll link it down below where you guys can pick one of these up, but I'm gonna christen it with some gorgeous, vibrant orange contrast paint, just straight out of the bottle and down onto our Zenithal fire dragons. The contrast is a perfect filter over all our white Zenithal highlights, and the darker red sits beautifully in the recesses. Seriously, stuff using normal brushes. I love airbrushes. Next, I threw down some bright yellow for the Fire Dragon's helmets to get their iconic Aspect Warrior scheme. And man, when I was a kid, yellow was a nightmare to paint when I last tried to do these models. These paints have come so far in the last 2 decades.
I'm old, Gandalf.
Then it's time for some green for our striking scorpions. I did a couple of passes of this to get the right sort of saturation that I wanted, but the lovely filter of the airbrush contrast still kept all of the definition of our Zenithal Prime, and the armor across both units is already looking amazing. The last big airbrush layer is Liquitex Black Ink, which is a bit of a painstaking layer to carefully base coat all of the details across both models, and it really brings the models to life. We're talking chainswords, guns, belts, pouches, weird space elf grenade thingies, you name it, we've got it right here at Zorpazorp's Eldar Emporium. Do you need to recover a lost spirit stone from the Eye of Terra? Well, grab the highest quality weaponry for the best prices anywhere on the craft world. I don't really know what that was about. The fever delirium is kicking it. Just like the other squads, I then used the Sharpies to pick out all of the metallic details, and now normally I would do a series of oil washes, but I just went with Nuln oil to try and keep the units the same sort of vibe as the original army, not as grimdark, and then after a quick bit of basing, that is the full Eldar force ready to rock and roll on the tabletop. And after a few more days, my fever finally broke, and now I've got the energy to get back out in the freezing studio and back to building their craft world. Although, as you may tell from my voice, this was obviously scripted optimistically because that hasn't happened yet. Now, as this battle report is going to be at 28mm scale, our next job is to convert the rest of this landscape from epic scale, so I removed all of the buildings from the ruined city and the upper city. I decided to leave a few of the upper spires and structures on the battlement towers because they kind of read quite nicely even at 40k scale, and the 3 elevator buildings were actually built as nice little hybrids of both 40k and epic scale scenery kits with a lot of foam kit bashing to make sure I could keep these buildings on the table at whatever scale I'm playing. Then it was time to repopulate our city with a whole bunch of gorgeous city ruins that I borrowed from my amazing mate Andy Tucker. A huge shout out to Andy. My own 28mm collection of buildings is still sitting in Australia, so he has really saved me here. Then the final piece, I slapped down the Imperial Guard buildings and our Eldar scenery on the new spots we've built for our Dawn of War bases. If you want your own Dawn of War buildings like these, you can get 20% off all the STLs from War Scenery, linked down in the description.
So there we have the Imperial Palace finally ready for its very first battle report over on Zorphammer, my second channel linked down in the description. What a milestone. So come with me right now and let's go see some Warhammer played on the Imperial Palace on Terra.